We are finally at the stage where we are preparing for our next adventure, which is being on the boat again and moving on the water, which is super exciting. But it also comes with its host of challenges and things that we really have to prepare for. Now, one big challenge here is in the Pacific Northwest, there is huge tides that can come with roaring currents. Just to name an example, there's Seymour Narrows, over 10 knots of current. So yeah, unless you're a powerboat, you can't do anything in those. And we have spent the last 7 years sailing in non-tidal waters. So that is why we most certainly need not only a refresher, but like input from an expert. And that is why we have Sailor Barry here with us, who has all his qualifications. And this is your sailing ground. This is where you've gathered all your experience and have sailed most of your life. Yep. So I'm very excited to learn from you, and
I'm pleased to be able to share it. Yeah, there's not too many places that beat this. I think like the Bay of Fundy, the entirety of it dries out, but yeah, it's pretty extreme here.
The waters around here definitely demand respect. Growing up here, I've heard many stories of what happens when you don't pay proper attention to the tides. But for people not familiar with the local area, I wanted to try and find some footage of just how serious it can get. This is not my footage. I found it on YouTube from someone named Peter Harvey, and I recommend watching the whole thing on his channel. I'll provide a link in our video description. But this footage is from the Sunshine Coast, where I grew up, at a particularly challenging tidal pass. You can transit this spot safely if you time it very correctly, but if you time it incorrectly, you can find yourself in real trouble. So this is a skill set that we're going to have to refamiliarize ourselves with in order to navigate these waters safely, and that's what we're going to be talking with Barry about today.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
What a way to set off. Yeah, but it's also manageable.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is entirely manageable. It just takes a little forethought, understand where the risks are. Because like out here in the Strait, you'll get like a knot or two, but going into the Gulf Islands, you can get 8 or 9 against you, and that's your only way in or out.
Yeah, makes sense though, because that is because of a restriction of landmass, right?
Yeah.
And so if all the current has to push through a narrow pass, that's when the current gets strong.
Yeah, just big bottlenecks everywhere. And then the kicker on top of that is once you've got that all figured out, you've still now got these bottlenecks that might be pointing as they're outflowing directly at the wind. So now you've got wind against current, which is awful.
Totally.
So it's like a 2-step thing, is check your timing and then check the weather based on it. Yeah.
Our first voyage is going to be down the Fraser River and across Georgia Strait to Gabriola Island. While there aren't any tidal passes on this route, the tide does actually push the Fraser River backwards when it's rising, so we want to plan our passage with all of that in mind. And then moving on, when we want to sail sort of in and around the Gulf Islands, and there's all these tidal passes where the currents are restricted by bottlenecks in the landmass, then we do want to be really careful with planning those passages, and so Barry's going to help us think through all of that as well.
So this is it here, we call it sand heads. The kicker is timing your departure so that you've got maybe a bit of river and ocean flowing out with you at the same time, so everything's in communication. There's no elements in opposition. And then truly the kicker is you don't want wind coming from the tip of Vancouver crashing into here, because now you've got a bit of wind against current, and that can make it absolutely erupt out here.
Yeah.
I've done this maybe 200 times, and only once have I seen it really bad, and it was just because it was ebbing and the river was coming out, so it was a lot of fluid coming out while the winds were pushing directly against it, and it just makes these incredibly uncomfortable rolling waves. And as you can see, it gets incredibly shallow.
Oh yeah,
so
totally.
As we all know, when the when the depth decreases, the wave state stacks up more and more. So this is the perfect storm for a bad situation right here.
Yeah. Maybe just to back up on a few terms, to keep it really basic, you were saying ebbing. Ebbing is when the tide is leaving, right? And the water level is dropping in simple terms. And instead the opposite, when the water is filling back up, that's flooding. Right?
And around here, typically, it changes further up Vancouver Island and inverts, but Pacific Ocean's out here. So as it's flooding, the water comes up, and as it's ebbing, it comes down.
Yeah. I can really imagine that one complicated thing, though, as well with the currents is how do they curl around the place that has so many islands? It's not always, it doesn't always make sense, right?
Yeah, it can be really confusing. You can be going into one place and be expecting to have a couple knots behind you, and then surprisingly, you got it on the nose, just maybe because you're tucked up and behind a little reef somewhere or whatever. It can happen all the time. The tide book does really break that down in a broad scale, in a small scale would be the correct term. You can see through the Gulf Islands there's spots where it's just curling in a whirlpool. So you can expect that you'd have it on the nose, but it turns out you're getting a 2-knot boost with you. So yeah, it's a little unpredictable. Well, it is entirely predictable. It's a little hard to juggle all that information in your brain at one time.
Okay, but there is literature where it can be
absolutely.
It can be looked and found, the info. Okay.
Yeah, perhaps it's a good chance to look at the tides here on the river. So at Steveston, beautiful thing about Navionics is it does have an extensive series of tidal markers. The sort of holy grail around Vancouver is Point Atkinson up here. That's what almost everything is based on. And you can see that right now it's low tide, but as we go up, it turns to high tide, and then the slack point is sort of this calm point where it's not really changing from high to low, and then this additional spot here where it's not changing from high to low again for quite a period of time. It stays there. That's the point where the waters are moving the least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's referred to as slack, either high slack or low slack.
Exactly. Yeah. Through the Gulf Islands, they provide a lot on Navionics for, like, for example, Gabriola Pass, which is one of these bottlenecks where you've got the entirety of, like, Trincomalee Channel coming all the way up here, and it has to either get out through Dodd Narrows or their intense bottlenecks. I don't like this one. It's a bit too intense.
Wow.
And you can check, not only does it come with the high and low, but also the
8 knots of current.
Yeah, right?
Wow, at the peak, yeah.
And then this point right here where this median line is, it shows you it's going this way, or it's going that way, or it's going this way. And you can see 0.06 or 0.6.
Oh, barely any, because it's changing from one direction to the other.
Yeah, and
so that's slack, and so you've got no...
Yeah, if you were going this way, you could get away with bucking into 1.7 knots, because probably by the time you're halfway through, it's only a few minutes later, it's now 0.1. And I wouldn't go through with 4 knots behind even, because it really gets these... They turn into like bubbling, swirling whirlpools, and you get standing waves and lots of bucking, and it's really hard to steer the boat. Sometimes I went through one of the passes, Polier Pass, often it can feel like you're getting hit with a sledgehammer on the bottom of your boat, and it's just like it gets turned, and then you feel the whole boat get shifted, and you're literally sweating trying to keep the helm in one direction.
I think that's a really important point of, like, it's not just about, because 4 knots of current doesn't sound like such a big deal.
Yeah, you know, it's like, let's go at 8, we'll be through in no time.
Exactly, but that's really not the case, because you're talking about whirlpools, you're talking about all these swirling eddies. Yeah. It's not like a nice, consistent 4-knot push. It's really something to avoid.
Yeah, there was actually one instance where we were on a charter on the Providence, and the skipper had gotten COVID, so suddenly as mate, I'm now acting captain. He had to isolate in the aft cabin and had no contact, and we were halfway through our charter, and we were down here, and we had plans to go to Blackberry Point, so I dropped them off there, and I was waiting. I let the guests hang out at the shore for an hour and a half, because then I knew it was going to be better timing to go through Gabriola Pass. We got up here, and the really tricky part that happens when you're going through these passes is that we started going through when we had I don't know, 2-ish knots with us.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that sounds delightful, right? You think you're going to be through in no time.
Yeah.
But what I noticed was the only thing the captain did, he came out, he opened the door and he goes, don't go full throttle.
Mm-hmm.
Keep 50% of it in reserve in case you need it.
Mm-hmm.
Because things get weird in there. So, and then he leaves. And as we're going through, I'm watching, you know, the red line that comes off of you on navionics. That's your true course over ground or your heading.
Yeah.
And I was pointing down the middle of the channel. My bow was right down. I was like, I'm pretty comfortable with this heading. And I looked down at navionics and I was pointed, my heading was at a beach.
Whoa, so you're like drifting.
Yeah, and so I had to go pretty hard to starboard, and thank God I had a lot of juice left. Give it a bunch more juice, and I was pointed at this shoal here, but my heading was straight.
Yeah, by
So-
speeding up.
So I
You
was
just made it.
like drifting in a car. I was literally going sideways through, and it's a 200-foot wide channel, and that's an 80-foot ship.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
not
that was
you don't
stressful.
want to be sideways in there.
Yeah.
And there was a log right in the way. I was like, God.
Oh. There's logs here too.
Yeah.
Debris. And that's definitely why we're not doing it in the dark. We chose our slack tide to be with daylight.
Yes,
Yeah.
good call. But yeah, it can get really tricky, especially down near Sydney and stuff too. There's a lot of really intense currents, and you think you're going straight, but you're legitimately going straight to land. So
Yeah.
it's really important to be giving yourself points of reference while you're going through these tidal passes. If you know that these two rocks are going to line up at one point, like study it well enough that you have an idea that, oh, when I can see this rock, that means I'm on a good heading. Now I can start turning. Like, you can pre-plan these sort of ideas out. Give yourself personal range points where you're like, once I hit this thing, I can turn here, because you don't want to 100% depend on this.
Totally. And not just that, it's all the compounding information of, the chart and how it mixes with the weather forecast. I got wind from this direction.
Yeah.
Better not to. Or
Yeah.
current is coming this way.
That's a really big kicker around here too. So people look at the weather often and they're like, okay, it's blowing 20 knots northwest. Well, I was out in a 20 knot southeast and that was fine, so I'm going to head out. No, the northeast or northwest and southeast here bring completely different conditions. And northwest over 20 is going to be very lumpy because it's from the tip of Vancouver Island all the way to here, which is what we call fetch, the land, the amount of water between land masses. So it's the ability for
swell to build. Or waves.
tiny waves, ripples at the beginning, and then eventually they start building up, and then by the time you get to Vancouver or the south arm of the Fraser River, that 20 knot northwest has built up these 6-foot waves, which are now stacking up even higher because it shallows up, and there's a current against it, so it gets even worse. So it's this huge compounding effect. Yeah, it can get pretty gnarly, but a southeast is from Tawasin over to the Gulf Islands, so that's a quarter of the fetch. So southeast can always feel a lot more calm, and also usually rainier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you usually get the rain with the southeasts.
Yeah. I certainly feel like renting an RV right now and going for a relaxed vacation instead of doing. But no, so
It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
To digest all of this terrifying at part information, how to take it, how to do passage planning, bite by bite.
The thing you would do is you pick where your departure is, choose where you want to end up, and if there's a tidal pass along the way. So once you know exactly where you're starting and where you're going, and you've made a conservative guess as to how long it will take to get there,
To the pass.
to the pass. So in this case, we can do a DST calculation.
What does that stand for?
DST is distance, speed, and time.
Okay.
So you go distance, and that would be divide, and then this anyone between here is times. So you got distance, speed, and time. So if you have your distance, let's say it's 25 nautical miles. So distance is 25, and then pick a good speed. So
4 or 5 knots, yeah.
Yeah, 5 knots. Divide by speed, which is 5 knots. That's 5. There you go.
So you get 5 hours. I see.
So that always results in the one you didn't do. And it's a very simple little calculation. And then you can go to said tidal pass. Let's say you wanted to head up my way and go through Gabriola Pass. So 5 hours, so let's say slack. You don't want to be going while it's with you. You could enter right around here, or while it's against you, pardon me, and then you could go through at about 5 a.m. We don't like that, too early.
Oh, I see. So then we just go for the next one.
Yeah.
See if that one is in daylight.
So you'd have to catch the tail end of this.
Yeah. And
that would be a good time to go through. So 11 noon.
Okay.
Noon would be an okay time. And then, so 5 hours before noon. Now check weather. And if it's a northwest over 25 or 20, you know it's going to be lumpy. If it's a southeast, you'll have the wind on the beam, and it'll be, if it's 20 knots, it'll be a little lumpy, but it'll be delightful. You'll go fast. And then if it's light or variable, you're motoring. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And you really only, around here, you get 2 predominant wind directions. So it's occasionally you'll get a easterly or a northerly, but...
So one big takeaway here seems to be conservative planning and patience. So it's like a saying that we learned. It's like when you have guests on board, they can choose either the destination or the time, but not both at the same time.
Oh, I like that, yep.
So I think here I see parallels where it's like you have to try to make it for that passage, but if you don't make it there in time, because who knows, it took you longer or not, then you also have to look for a plan B and maybe anchor, and you have to wait out for the next
absolutely
the next slack where there's less currents.
That's actually exactly the reason why Silva Bay is such a common destination for people. It's kind of the place. It's it's maybe the only place in the Gulf Islands that you can get into that has no tidal passages.
Okay.
So you can cross the Strait of Georgia and you can go there any time of day, and people go in there and they'll just wait, and then you'll see 7 boats leave all at the same time. So you can be like, oh, it's probably slack tide at Gabriola Pass. Everyone's going for Gabriola right now.
So best not to call your friend and say, I'll be there tomorrow. It's like, okay, I'm on my way towards your direction. I'll see you in the next couple of days.
Yeah, we call it sailing, not scheduling.
Exactly.
They don't mix it all.
Yeah. Patience.
The thing doctors have. Patience.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. We just don't have to rush anywhere.
Yes.
And know the time when to do so. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And just don't leave the north arm or the south arm on a northwest, not on a big one.
Yeah. That's the Fraser.
Yep.
Because otherwise it's wind against current.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, a lot of this sounds daunting, but luckily we're not new to all of it. Following your story, I always things came to mind, and I was like, oh yeah, eddies, currents. That reminds me of the Strait of Messina. Not big tides in the Med, but between Italian mainland and Sicily, it has a bit of a restriction, and there was currents that you had to take into account. And when you talk now about traffic and regulations about collisions, the Rhine River comes to mind. We sure had our share of traffic there on the river, so good we have already a bit of experience with us.
Absolutely, you guys do.
But I really appreciate everything about tides and passages and passage planning here. Yeah, that's going to be very valuable. Shall we go get out and do it in practical terms?
Yeah, well.
Gather experience.
Yeah, I'm ready. Questions are you. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go.